introduce, I'll introduce Jaivet Ealom. He's a Rohingya from Myanmar. I think actually Javid actually calls it Burma. And he fled genocide in his homeland in 2013. And however, the deep and unsettling resonance of Escape from Manus, the untold true story, is not the only harrowing journey from Burma for safety, but rather his escape from what Jaivet refers to as the prison of the Manus Island Regional Processing Center. And through his own ingenuity and bravery, Jaivet is one of the only people to escape Manus on his own and be able to find a new future as a newcomer. Well, I guess he's not a newcomer anymore in Canada. So I'd like to everyone to delve into what it means to seek refuge and consider what can be achieved by one man determined to beat the odds. And Jaivet now resides in Toronto, where he's a prominent spokesperson for the Rohingya community, and he also is studying at the University of Toronto, and also works for a company that provides software to non-profit organizations, as well as inspiring other people as newcomers to make their own way into the world, into their new country. And interviewing or talking to Jaivet today is Stephen Watt, who I was introduced to by a man in Kabul in 2017, because he knew that I was trying to find a home for people on Manus, and he introduced me to Stephen. And Stephen actually grew up close by, 45 minutes away from where I grew up in Canada. And we've been working since 2017 to help some of the people from offshore be sponsored to Canada. But Stephen in 2015 has been working to bring refugees from a lot of different countries to Canada. And I don't know the exact number of how many Stephen has sponsored and or kind of assisted with applications and finding sponsors for, but I know it's well over the 100 mark. I'm sure Stephen can tell you exactly how many people he's been able to help, but it's inspiring that we've been able to work together in helping people from offshore, but also Stephen's new work is working with the Hazara community in Indonesia to help them find a home in Canada as well. So I introduced both Jaivet and Stephen.
Who talks first? Okay, I want to thank Jill, because Jill, and actually this whole group, I see a lot of familiar faces, which is comforting. Hi, Heather Hedges and Natasha. But I want to thank you guys for hosting this, because you know, Australia gets a bad rap in Javid's book, and obviously for obvious reasons, but a lot of the fundraising we've been doing even now for like Afghans and stuff, a lot of that fundraising is being done in Australia. So there obviously are some very good motivated humanitarians there. And Jill is the reason she's the first person who used the word Manus in my memory. And I remember her saying back in 2017, oh, you know, there's this Syrian guy on Manus. And I was like, what's that? What are you talking about? Because he knew I was doing on Syrian applications. And that's how it all began. So that was how the first private sponsorships that I was involved with began, was basically through Jill, and they've continued ever since. And it's now kind of other people have taken notice, and it's developed a lot of traction. So I am very thankful to her for that conversation and for continuing to do private sponsorship and be an amazing advocate, and also for this organization for the same reasons. So enough about that. We're here to talk about Javid's book. And by the way, we're all mispronouncing his name, me included, and I'll never pronounce it correctly because it's been too long. But how do you pronounce your name?
It's flat Javid, but I realize there is a lot of other names that I can pronounce well by myself. So like I can kind of, okay, there is others that I can pronounce well. So if you can pronounce well, that's fine by me.
Okay. So we'll get into the kind of issues that the book talks about, because it's a really interesting combination of like page turner suspense novel and then really deep think about systems of oppression and things like that. So we'll try to cover both. So just to kind of get things started, I've always thought of you as like the most lucky and unlucky person in the world. Like you were dealt some really bad cards, and yet you did some really amazing things that shouldn't have been possible. Like everyone knows you got off Manus, but that's kind of where the next half of the story begins. You're skipping around the South Pacific and dodging authorities with just like a library card, really. And you ended up in Canada as a permanent resident. So was that just luck or ingenuity, or like how do you explain this?
I actually don't know how many things are involved that you can call it. It's a combination of I got lost counting how many factors that you could count into that become that luck, or if you want to call it luck in that way. But oftentimes it is there are a lot of other players behind the scene, if you want to call it that way, who were complete strangers to me, and I was complete stranger to them, but some took the chance of like the risks of losing their job and career, and yet just to help a complete stranger they never met, they never knew. And I think I would credit a lot of my luck to those invisible helping hands behind, who I can never thank them enough. And contradictory, like I was coming out of Manus when I was, this whole bitter and salty of like the host Australian governments, and then paradoxically came up the helping hands where one of the women was actually an Australian. So there was that.
Yeah, you do sort of pay homage. Now you've mostly given them fake names because a lot of them are still in those jobs and they were taking huge risks helping you, right?
Yeah, some of them could end up like their law career if they were to know that they have been involved in yet illegal but ethical sort of like helping out. So I reserve their real name just to be safe.
Now that's something, I'm going off script a little bit, but that's something we were talking about, I guess, yesterday, that when the system is messed up and unethical, then you breaking the rules is ethical. Like it's sort of the reverse of the normal thing. Like this is a system, you play by the rules, but in this system, the system is so messed up that you have to break the rules.
Yeah,
right?
it is kind of like when the rules are stacked against you on purpose, intentionally torture and dehumanize you, and there is no virtue following those rules. Like you kind of do what you need to do to overcome them, and then there is I don't see any virtue following the rules that are intentionally designed to dehumanize a category of people.
Right, and a number of points in the book, you sort of had a choice between doing what you were told to do and breaking the rules. And the people, you typically would break the rules intelligently, but the people who didn't break the rules, what happened to them?
They were crushed like to the ground, and it is not like as the Burmese saying goes, never expect mercy from your oppressor. And then like some of the peoples were either scared or couldn't fathom the fact that like someone will crush them to the ground so deep at the level of where they were, like for example in Manus. So but for me, they were like never expect mercy from your oppressors and break the rules to make make it happen,
Yeah.
to what need to be happened.
Yeah. So I'm gonna stay on the page turner aspect of the book. Your boss, whose face is there in black and white, commented that she couldn't put the book down, and my mother said that. My father, who's not that much of a reader, said that. I've heard this from a lot of people, that you start the book and it's like reading like a spy novel that or whatever, where you have to get to the end. And in the case of your boss, she knows it ends well because you work for her here in Toronto, but she still couldn't put it down because there's such a forward propulsion of, it's one trap after another trap after another trap. And one of the metaphors you use is that there's a wall at your back, an invisible wall, and you can never go back. Tell me about that and how that kind of gives that book the feeling of a page turner.
Well, it was pretty much a first-person perspective, the way what I saw, the way what I was going through, and what happened at the moment. And during those years, getting off the Manus and until washing up in Toronto Pearson Airport, it was a constant run. There was no break. There were no pause. So when that experience translated into pages, I think the pages kind of reflect that aspect, that there were never a break in this point. And to Natasha, I actually didn't know if I will be okay at any point, because it was everything was unexpected like this. Nothing was certain at any time. It was this complete randomness playing course.
Yeah, but you say that you never rested, which is funny because there was a period of years where you were basically held in a detention center that was purposely designed to sort of make nothing happen except endless lineups for cigarettes and things like that. But one thing that you get from the book is that you were always casing out the system and looking for like a gap or a hole or a way through, which might explain your luck. It wasn't luck. You were always sort of doing systems analysis to say, what is the system here and how can I break through? And I think that I would think you were unusual in doing that of the guys there, right?
Yes, that kind of goes to my upbringing in Burma, where you were brought up in a country where the government, the regime is like constantly pressing you, and you have to crack every possible gaps just for the sake of survivals. And I think when you put a person like that in places like Manus, where it was very fine-tuned, the system, the detention center was like very, not in physical aspect, but in a lot of other non-physical aspect, like fine-tuned, you kind of start, and plus you got nothing else to do other than lining up for washroom and food. You kind of get boredom could get you to thinking a lot, and you kind of start, your brain automatically started scanning and for potential cracks if things get to the worst point.
Actually, sorry, we have a cat in the room, which is so cute. This is something I hadn't thought about before, but you mentioned Burma as almost training for Manus, and that makes total sense now that you say it. Because some people say that the Burma chapters are like the most eye-opening, because I think Manus by this point has a bit of a track record. People who care to find out can find out. But growing up as a Rohingyan in Burma, like that just blew me away. How deliberate the oppression was, how, the open air prison metaphor, the fact that you're stateless in your own country largely, which is why you only had a library card to sort of get around the world. So that is something very unique to this book, is that you already had trained a deep immersion in a system of deliberate oppression. What I'm thinking now is, did that give you almost an advantage when you're on Manus?
I would say I started just seeing a lot of parallel between how these two regimes operate, and sometimes it is almost like verbatim. For example, assigning numbers to people was something that I only experienced in a in the totalitarian governments like Burmese military. But then like when I saw that pattern repeating on Manus, I said like there was no differences. And then like once things started, for example, transferring of the refugees from Christmas Island to Manus Island was almost exactly the same point as the way the junta will grab someone from the home, which only happened at the very dawn, like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the morning without any notice. And that's exactly the same thing. The guards will come for you, give you like 10 minutes to grab your stuff and lead you to bunker sort of places without any signage or without any explanation where you're going to. And those stuff of like very little things are exactly parallel, or if not verbatim, of like what Burmese regime were doing. So to me, it kind of gave me like a familiarity, if not advantage, of like what to expect, what not to expect. But I got a lot of questions from, especially from those in Australia, comparing this Australian government's actions on Manus to those of Burmese. To me, as someone who have gone through the both system, both are equally evil. While the Australian one was sugar-coated and sell to the Australian publics, so that they can pay for it with the taxpayer money or whatnot. But on Burma, other side, it was the brutality was like it is outright there. Everybody can see it. So people, it's being criticized in the media. But on Manus case, it was you were locked up in the middle of nowhere, out of sight, out of mind, kind of. And then whatever happened there was then go through a lot of if there is a person called press person, so whoever crafted the statement for the governments where the word it were being wordsmith and being sugar coated and then sell to the Australian public. So it is it's hard to see the way it is from outside compared to Burma.
Yeah, that the media the media wall of distortion is a metaphor that occurs a few times. So, a lot of Australians just wouldn't know what's going on there because it's all sort of filtered through these right-wing media organs. But one other thing that you are saying right now, which makes me think, I remember it was during the time of Donald Trump where he was just outright lying all the time, like just lying, and somebody said that it's kind of a dictator strategy that you tell things that are obvious lies as a power move to say, like I'm saying that the sky is red, and you're like, no, it's not. But it's like, well, I can say it is, right? Like the brazenness is actually part of the dictator strategy, is that you just say whatever you want, say screw you, screw the consequences. But in Australia, as you say, it was filtered. So a lot of Australians were just hearing this language like I don't know, like save our seas. I forget what the stupid phrases they were using, or calling refugees aliens or whatever. All this kind of like rhetoric, so which kind of softens the public to the brutality that was. They don't even know about the brutality, but if they hear about it, they're like, oh, I think we're defending our borders through Australian Border Force. So it's a different play. It's kind of a democracy's way of having a totalitarian system, right?
Yeah, it is. At some point, there's also a combination of both in came into play. For example, I personally believe like if the Scott Morrison think he could get away, he would just lie plain out loud. For example, when the Manus was completely closed and the attack happened, and it was Scott Morrison who was then immigration minister, went onto media and saying it was the guys who went out and started attacking instead of people from outside coming into the Manus. And it was Scott Morrison who told that Reza Barati was killed out of the detention while it was literally on MA6. And it was Scott Morrison who was telling like the guy who escaped went rampaging rampaging the village nearby, but in case it was the local who cut and killed local plus local military and guards. So I think if he could get away with it, I think he wouldn't be hesitant for a single second like to lie it out flat. But if he think there is there's accountability and there's like fact checking that will follow him, or the possibility of that, then he will go on and like starting this sugarcoating. And to your point, there were a lot of dehumanizing language purposefully placed into to kind of like these deceptions in play. At first it was detainee illegal arrivals, then it became transferee, and it became aliens, and like, so it kind of like essentially say everything, but nothing that's actually is like. And then contrary to the fact where 80% of the people who were sent to I think it was 79 point something sent to offshore detentions were actually found refugees instead of all the other labels that were being used in the media. So there's a lot of forces behind the play between what actually happens and how it's being sold to the Australian public.
Right, like because the basic fact is Australia signed the various Geneva Conventions, which means it's not illegal to claim asylum in a country under that. And I mean, that seems like common sense, but in this case, if you sign the Geneva Convention, it's actually you're committing yourself legally to that point of view. So to call someone who claims asylum, which is your full right as a human being on this earth and under the Geneva Convention, to then call them like aliens or what all this nonsense, that's all distortion language. And it is also violating like these major agreements that Australia and much of the world has signed, right?
Yeah, I often say it is not like granting asylum or granting refugee is not something you are doing out of mercy or Australia should do out of generosity, but it is like a legal commitment that you sign up to. And consequently, that's why you're having a chair in the UN Security Council, because you're committed to certain virtue and law, but it's not like you have to beg or you are at the mercy of like whoever is granting you asylum. It's actually a commitment you sign up to. If you don't want to withhold it, just get rid of the ratifications of the conventions and other commitment that you sign up to.
Yeah, and then just on a more like basic human level, I think one of the things the book will do is strip away all this kind of refugees are just either sort of scary foreigners who want to destroy our culture, or refugees are sort of economic tourists who are just looking for an easy win kind of thing, just to show how crazy bad things have to be for you to leave your homeland, family, job, school, life, everything your culture, your whole comfort zone, and just throw the dice, get on a crappy fishing boat and cross the ocean for days. I mean, that's and the other thing that I think people are sort of another eye-opening thing about the book is like you were basically a middle-class kid, and you were like very privileged in some ways for Rohingya, you relatively speaking. You had like all sorts of educated professionals. You were doing a pharmacy job, and or about to graduate from pharmacy, and you never thought of like, oh, one day I'm going to be a refugee. You were just on a certain path, which was doing quite well. And I think that's one of the surprises of the book is like, you left the country because it's something you had to, and you're like, and then I became a refugee, right? This isn't something you like defined yourself as, and maybe still isn't.
Yeah, it was never expected. It was almost like an overnight sort of, you kind of, from having everything and from having a family or someone to lean back into, like you become no one in the middle of nowhere with nothing to lean back to except that invisible wall who keep pushing me back from the back on. And a few interesting perspectives that I often get from the people where like how the guys on Manus plus refugees in general were being portrayed in mainstream media in Australia was like economic immigrants was like a huge thing. But I think in the book I said enough of how that is completely the opposite of an immigrant, economic immigrant. Why? Something the very basic that I think a lot of people who never had to leave, not for vacation, like abandon their home, don't understand. It's like nobody, literally nobody on earth, like to abandon their home. Like this is your home. And I think when they say, why did you come to Australia? Like when you are fleeing a genocide or when you are fleeing some ethnic cleansings or some violence war, you don't necessarily care where you're going to. All you care is like, you don't care if you're jumping into some private property or whatnot. Like all you care is to get the fence that will give you the highest survival chance from the snake that's chasing you. That's basically, so nobody ever want to abandon their home and come to Australia. It was like they had to flee, and that's probably one of the only chance that offered any glimpse of hope that they take up into Australia. And the fact that like that goes against the economic immigrants title is, not everyone get out of the country in the first place. It is often you need to speak certain language, you need to be able to tap into info, and you need to be resourceful enough to be able to leave the country. That's like the very basic level of like natural selection there going on. And then like you end up into places like Indonesia, where you have like thousands that were being used as a holding pen, essentially also by Australia. Getting out of there is again another sort of like another level of natural selection that's going on there. There's a lot of people who end up in jail. That people I know, I spent 6 years, like 5 years in Indonesian jail. And then finally, the final selections would be like on Manus. Like if anybody come out sanely from Manus, that's like probably the highest, the selected of the selected of the selected. Like,
Yeah.
So that's completely, to me, everything that has to do against the economic immigrants. Like why would an economic immigrant would spend 9 years, some of them who are coming today, would spend in places like Manus.
Yeah, the book talks about that, how in some ways these people who are being sort of ground into the dirt are some of the most high potential people around, right? And I think you're an example of that. So as soon as you came, again, with nothing, you managed to make all sorts of opportunities happen for yourself. That's also true of other people I know, both from Manus and from other places. It's almost like they make up for lost time. And they just need a smidgen of opportunity in a country like Canada, and then you just watch them take off. Like there's none of this laziness and complacency that you get when you're actually born in this country. But these are high potential people, and like you say, there's this whole screening process. If you are not resourceful and a risk taker and somebody who can put together a plan, you're going to stay back in your country and die in that civil war or get jailed by your totalitarian regime, right? But in Canada, if I can plug our country a little bit, we like to pride ourselves in giving people a bit of more of an opportunity, and we actually put resources into that happening to make sure that they learn English and get job skills. Compare that to, like, this is something we've been talking about the last couple of days, how you could almost do dollar for dollar. Like Australia has spent X number, well, like billions, detaining the people on Manus, and boy, would Canada spend that money differently. I would hope they probably spend those billions on like ESL programs and so on and so forth. Tell us about Canada versus Australia in your experience.
I think in a very short brief point is like to focus on Australia. Like a lot of argument that I often heard, oftentimes from guards and Manus, was like how they're afraid of that, like this refugee will go and tap into Centrelink, I think, which is equivalence of your Ontario work or like the welfare programs. They're afraid of that and yada yada. These people never expect you to work, but what funny thing is like they're afraid like that inclusion will cost money, but at the same time, it is the exclusion was costing more, or if not triple,
Yeah.
more money. So it's not just inclusions that might cost money at the beginning with a bigger potential return at the end, where it is the exclusion costing double amount of money, and without having like without any return at a cost of like moral and political like cost.
Yeah, that shows a very basic lack of awareness of economics. That if you exclude people from the economy, that's somehow going to help it. Now, you mentioned Indonesia, and I'm happy you did because that's a place that's near and dear to my heart. One thing that you discovered, and that Jaivet, who has come to Canada in the last couple of months, has written about extensively, and it's less known by Australians. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, Australians know about Manus. It's sort of famous by this point. But maybe they know less that Australia is also behind what's happening in Indonesia. And you talk about a holding pen where people have been there also for 9 years. I mean, it all started at the same time. But there's like many thousands more of them. I think there's 8,000 Hazara Afghans in Indonesia who are, they're put in prisons, and then they're put in these sort of refugee housing, and then they can't work, can't marry, can't open a bank account, can't go to school, can't travel without permission, this and that. So they people in the prime of their lives who are 9 years in are just trying to make it, like, just waiting, and they're not being resettled by the UNHCR, coincidentally or not, whose bills are being paid by Australia.
That's why I said it's a holding pen by Australia, because like ultimately at the end of the day, Australia is the one footing the bill, like and also Australia accept even to regular humanitarian intake of I think 1,600 quota per year or something. They take from everywhere except Indonesia. So that like that's just one concrete examples of why Indonesia is being used as a holding pen by Australia.
Yeah.
And to some extent, in my experience, even the UNHCR in Indonesia is like highly afraid of to going or doing anything against the Canberra office. That's like a personal experience that I have encountered with personnel from the UNHCR. So that's how much power like exerted by Australia to these neighboring countries, and in Indonesia case, both the governments and the agency processing them at the cost of the Australian taxpayer.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned Indonesia, because to the viewers here, if you don't know already, we are privately sponsoring. This is me giving a plug. Privately sponsoring a number of Afghans in Indonesia, and that's a good place to park your money. Another, obviously, sponsoring people from Manus is still happening, and in fact, in an hour or two, we will be at the airport welcoming 3 people who were sponsored by Toronto sponsors, and I think you know them. So they're coming here through private sponsorship. We've got other people coming from Indonesia in the coming weeks. So Canada has this unique private sponsorship program, and Northern Lights Canada, which we and one other woman are the co-founders of, sort of promotes this Canadian private sponsorship program, which is unique in the world, in that it allows any ordinary citizen to bring, a refugee to Canada through fundraising and paperwork and sort of commitments to help them. But you have said, I don't know privately or publicly, that when it comes to the people who basically are being held by Australia, that Canadian private sponsorship, while it's great for the people who participate in it, it's not really a great solution, sort of on a grander scale. Talk about that.
Yeah, the way I see it's the private sponsorship programs like Group of Five were meant for individual to sponsor individual, not something as systematic as Manus, where you can't even leave if there you have enough people. You have to get clearance of that, clearance of this. So, and this was not like a chaos or like things falling out of place. It was like a government policy intentionally set to crush these people. and I don't see it as a good solutions for those for something like that. Like why not fix up what have been messed in the first place? Like that would be obvious solutions. And also a lot of guys from Manus, like they have a lot of beautiful people supporting them. They have befriended them and have families in Australia. And why would send them across the world, half across the world, where they might know no one, instead of fixing what had been messed up in the first place, and do not only the right thing to do to let them settle is a good thing to do, because you could see a lot of Manus guys, even from the very limitation of the Manus, and with so little resources, they created extraordinary things from such a position. So it is a good thing. Like let them. Why against the same argument? Why waste the money like to hold them instead of like let them build, like which will be a win-win for both.
Right.
But I'm happy that as long as they get out wherever it is, I think they deserve that more than anyone. That doesn't matter where it is, Toronto, or it doesn't matter if it's Australia.
Right, because
They
they're on
deserve
these temporary exit visas in Australia, right?
Yeah, I think they call it bridging visa.
Right.
I don't know where does it bridge to, because you gotta get out like after 6 months. That means like get out of here. And I don't know, it's bridge to the border to get out. I actually don't understand the term there, but it's called bridging visa.
Right, and they have to keep renewing it, and employers are afraid to hire them because there's so much uncertainty. Why not just like you say, they've got friends, they've got contacts, they've got networks, they've got people who want to hire them. Like, why not just let them be there? Like, that's what Canada, I mean, that's what a rational country with a basic sliver of humanity would do, right? But they're on these bridging visas for like decades, right? There's no like.
I think
getting out of them.
the Australians should try to change the name at least to reflect the reality. Then bridge to nowhere.
Bridge to nowhere visa. So you mentioned private sponsorship. The one thing that sometimes bothers me a bit about it is it's very brand Canada, and it can easily get into like white savior complex, like Canada help me become a human being, which really downplays all the strengths that people come already with, and they're so it can be kind of like Canadian propaganda. It can be kind of white savior.
But again, a lot of people sponsoring are not necessarily all are white.
No, they're not.
All of them are even born in Canada. So like there's I mean, like there might be some white or some, again, white is so vague, as we say, born in Canada. Like most of them are not even born in Canada, or like second generation Canadian. So I don't think it is necessarily a propaganda. It is more of I see it more of a chance for individual to make a difference rather than when the government. I think if Australia has the similar system, I'm pretty sure the Manus guys would have been out way before now. Like
that's a funny thing about private sponsorship is like the sponsors who are doing all sorts of work and fundraising stuff, they love it. They get so, I mean, me too. I get so much fulfillment out of it. It's like, why would you say no to that? Anyway, in your case, you were not, and people often say, oh, were you privately sponsored? Oh, were you brought here by whatever organization? And you have to say, no. So you don't have this kind of inbuilt gratitude that you're supposed to have as a privately sponsored person, right? Like this, like Canada saved me. You came here by accident, largely.
Yeah.
And so Canada kind of had to earn your gratitude in a way, or I mean, Canada did take you in, but Canada didn't like deliberately say, come here and we shall save you, right? So do you have gratitude, or did Canada earn your gratitude, or does it need to earn your, like, how do you feel about Canada?
I think it started earning from the very point of the Toronto Pearson Airport, when the girl was like this going out and buying me. So I arrived like on Christmas Eve past midnight, for those who don't know, like, and I've been traveling for about 4 days 3 nights without any proper sleeps. Not traveling, I would say running. 4 days 3 nights without any proper food. So by the time I got I got to the Toronto airport, like I was kind of like having a lot of stomach acid built up and like having this pain, and the guard, who I immediately connected with the guards on Manus, so I was just myself mentally preparing to go through interrogations physically and mentally. Refused to interview me because I was having pain, and then like he said, oh, the kitchen is closed, it is past midnight, but then he went out and buy me some Subway so that like I can eat and he can interview me. I think it started earning from the very airport, and it has been so far so good. Okay. Couldn't complain anything.
Great. I could ask you more, but I think we're sort of at our time that we committed to. I don't know if the hosts want to tell us to keep going or get into the Q&A section.
I think it would be good to give some of the questions that I can read, but I think
Yeah, we can't read the questions.
someone will read it out so that like we can answer a few.
Yeah, no, we might just go for a little bit with questions from the floor. Like maybe if you just type your question into the chat or just break in. But I might actually just start off with one. First of all, though, Javid, you are a fantastic advertisement for the public library system. There's no doubt about that. And I'm sure Mary would be delighted with your story about the public library card.
Library cards are powerful things.
Yeah. So, but I just wonder, like, tell me, what do you hope that your book will do for other asylum seekers in your shoes? Your method, your ability to take that abstract attitude is incredible. But what do you feel? What do you hope for your book? What would it achieve with other refugees?
I wouldn't recommend anybody do what crazy things I do. I didn't know it would be successful in the first place. It's like a lot of randomness in play and a lot of things I wouldn't do if you asked me to do again. I don't think I'll be able to do so. I wouldn't recommend anyone do what I did. It was just this extreme measures like call for extreme actions. But I think those are still my friends and other brothers, like still those are from Manus, specifically speaking. I think they should hold up a little bit longer. I know I hate to give any false hope, and I hate if somebody would give me false hope. And when I was in Manus, and I clearly didn't expect like this will take 9 years. I couldn't imagine myself more than 4 years longer, so I got out. But like I could never imagine, and still sometimes really hard to believe that it's been 9 years and they're still like, these are the, for example, one of the guy arriving today, I share a tent with him on Manus, and like it has been 9 years, like he have been inside Manus. I just wanted to pass like a word of like, just hold on a little bit longer. I know this is not ideal, and holding on while you're in situation like Manus is like the last thing you want to hear. But there is nothing else we can do either other than just holding on a little bit longer.
Thanks. Now, look, I'm conscious that you also have to get to the airport, and that we're theoretically we're going to go to 11, but maybe we just go for another 15 to 20 minutes. Is that okay with everyone? And so anyone else want to unmute yourself at the moment, take the opportunity and fire away with a question, or anyone here? Because also I've got heaps more questions. The shadow over the Pacific while we're waiting. In your book, you talk about going on that boat trip from one island to Honoraria. And now they've all got this biometric identification stuff. Does that informal ability, that ancient tradition going back thousands of years before the idea of nationality, will that still be happening, do you think, in the Pacific? Will they ignore the biometric ID?
I think it will still continue. I hope it will still continue. It's like beautiful traditions out there where nobody care about what you are on the paper. People are like very down to earth, a really high trust society out there. I really hope it continue. But I don't see at the same time enough resources there to enforce actually any border there. So I do hope like it still continue. It's,
Oh,
it's
how
absurd that
good. Okay, anyone questions? All right. Yeah. Okay, meanwhile, still waiting. Great interview, Stephen, by the way. This terrible situation that is developing on Manus at the moment in PNG with Australian government abandoning them. At the end of the year, there'll be about 100. It's estimated that about up to 15 of them have got no ability. They're so traumatized to care for themselves. How do we case the joint, Javid? How do we case the joint? What sort of cracks are there? How can we stop this? Any ideas?
I wish I have like a realistic answer. It's heartbreaking. Like we are just not jailing, torturing 9 years, but you are torturing them like you are taking away the most primitive years of their life, and most of them will be so broken. Like it take a lot of time to actually build up back to come close to anything normal. So it's like you're just not taking their 9 years of their life, you're taking the most primitive 9 years of their life, which they should have been figuring out their career or their life or their job or their trade. And if you take up that, it will be really hard for these people. Once you come out, you have to go through this enough rebuilding and to find a career or to find a trade back. So you're just basically ruining their whole life. I wish I have any realistic answer how to stop that happen until there is enough people to get up against these atrocities that the government is committing under your name. Like for example, I often said to him, like by large, from people outside of Australia, like in Australia, like it's obvious and people are aware, but in places like far away, like here in Canada, like people don't really distinguish or care whether it's the Australian governments or they're decent people. At the end of the day, they saw like, oh, the Australian did it. It's like basically your name. I think it's like labeled as Australians. So I think until enough people get up and say enough is enough, like continuing this under your name with your money, I don't see any shortcut to that. I wish there is any.
Sure. I see Elizabeth Cox's comment that about working with the people in PNG to explain more about the truth of asylum seekers, not the lies, and that might be one method as well, of course. Questions? Come on, people. Now's your chance.
I have a question. I'm not sure whether this is appropriate, so you can pass on it if you want. Other than the boat ID, which is like concentration camp, the same, what are the other things that you talk about in the book, or things that were the most dehumanizing on Christmas Island and Manus, so that people can understand more? Like, I mean, I've got lots of people that have told me, but I think that's the most important piece of this, is to know exactly what the Australian government did.
Manus, still even today, the other day, I think I read how the government was announcing, oh, processing in PNG or processing in Manus was closed, which is like, sounds like a very good dark joke to the ears. It's not. The system continue, and the physical aspect of Manus was, I think, probably account for 20% of the torture, while mental and other psychological torture that have been put onto place where it would count like 80%, at least for me. There were not only individual psychological tortures, but there were this, like, for example, you have to line up even to use the bathroom on a daily basis, and purposefully not putting any shade in the equatorial heat of like Manus, on those lines where you spend 40 to an hour-long line, not having any privacy, even in your showers, calling up by numbers, and constant mockery of like by the guards. If you, I think that was the biggest torture for those who understand the slightest bit of English. Like you are constantly subjected to this guard making funs and making mockery of you. And I think the biggest of the biggest is that the whole detention is indefinite. Like this is something the worst, like criminal get a sentence and count to a day they would get out. Essentially the light at the end of the tunnel, if you want to call, which has been denied to anyone on Manus and offshore processing center. So your detention is indefinite. You don't know when or if you will ever get out, and that eat up me, and that eat up people's alive during their nights. Like you just don't know if or when you will ever get out. And like I said, I couldn't adjust the fact that it's been 4 years like that. I couldn't handle 4 years, so I decided to take things on my own hand. But I could never imagine that it will be 9 years that these guys are still inside, and I still don't know, and I still don't have a date to look to, so that they can count out at the end of the day they will be, will get out. Like they don't know, and they don't know when. And I think that's the most significant psychological torture that's have been put into place, among many other things that I can list.
Thank you, Javid. It's amazing how in Australia it's illegal to have it's legal to make indefinite detention legal. But here's Kate Sullivan. She has a question.
So I have friends. I have one friend in Port Moresby now, and also some friends who have been in detention or are in detention in Australia. So I'd like maybe some advice on how we can help those people when they do get free. What are the things that you've been able to do or have been done to you, or what has helped you deal with and process your trauma and help you in your healing process in your new life, that maybe we can take something away from and help with our friends here?
I don't know if I would call this is something that we have been discussing. I would say healed. I just started accepting the fact that it was something terrible that I have to live with. It was something terrible that happened, and I have to learn from it. And instead of trying to recover from it as if it is something to be recovered from, one of the things that helped, especially I think when you came out, is anything that resembled the normalcy of society. For example, to me, the most cutest thing was seeing kids and old people, like because there was none in the detentions. All you see is like this either built up, buffed up like guards or the other guys, and getting to see an old couple having chat with their grandkids on the side was like the most cutest thing in the world, because that resembled the normalcy of a society that you should be living with. So I would say anything that resemble like that, give them a little bit of like belonging in the normal society would help, like instead of constant reminder of like a man.
Okay, another question, if anyone's got one ready, fire up, or otherwise, can you get your family over from Burma? Is that possible for you now?
It hasn't been possible for me yet, but I am hoping it will become possible in sometime soon. Hopefully, getting that Burma just derailed into a whole full-blown civil war from a dictatorship, like from a dictatorial country. So I'm hoping that's something that become possible hopefully soon.
Maybe you should send them a library fine for an overdue book that has to be paid in Canada. But yeah, anyway, so is anyone else there got a question? Any question? Anyone? questions here? All right. So the other thing is, you know, when you get your PhD, can you design an education program for 80 million refugees on how to case the system? Because that's what it's going to take eventually, isn't it? I mean, this year it's 80 million, but you know, in a few years' time, that number will multiply with the effect of climate change, won't it? See you, Annie. Yeah.
I think there have been a few good initiatives going on. Again, not to promote Canada or like Canadian propaganda, but so there is something called Refugee Advocacy Network of Canada, which is a group of former refugees and refugees that are being called to group up and being called to advise the Canadian government. And the Canadian government was the first ones actually to send a refugee in their delegation to the United Nations. And that model has been copied by Germany, and it's have been copied by the US this year. And there was actually an email, I think a conversation a few days ago from New Zealand, where they wanted to form a similar agency where the refugee were in a place where they are being called by the government to advise on policy related to refugees. So there's like a few good initiatives going on, but they just need more, and definitely would love if something ever close comes to Australia.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, we'll just continue with we're trying to make trouble here and change direction. Just to bring it back to the beginning a little bit, Annie said that sovereignty was never ceded. And this means that for Australia, when the Australian Prime Minister, John Howard, said, we decide who comes to this country, he did not have that right. But we might as well start to wrap things up. So thank you very much, Stephen. That was one of the most compelling interviews that you did with Javid. That was terrific. And your cat played an excellent role. Didn't make too much noise. And so, Javid, I believe you're writing a second book. Is that right? Or
not quite yet.
okay.
There is a slight different version coming out for Canadian version, but it's not a new book.
It has new material.
It has new material, additional materials, but is not a completely new book.
Okay, well, we will continue on trying to case the system and break this thing down, and we will one day. It's got to come.
Yes, please.
Underneath its own weight, even. And so, to people here who are in Newcastle, one of the campaigns that we are going to take up is the situation of the 14,000 people that Australia has kept deliberately in Indonesia since about 2014. And tomorrow we're going to be premiering a film by Sydney filmmaker Alfred Peck. It's called Freedom Street, which is actually the name of the street, I think, in Makassar, where there's some refugees held there, and two of those are actually going to make it. One of them's already there, Johnny Ed.
Yeah, he is the guy I mentioned who is kind of the leading. He was sponsored by Javid's boss, Small World. And Javid's boss and her sort of friends and neighbors sponsored him to come here. And he came about a month ago. And he is the leading journalist on Australia's sort of dirty business in Indonesia. So it's very great that he's in the film. Yeah. And it's a great film.
You've seen Freedom Street? Or...
Yeah, I've seen versions of it because I've been talking to Alfred for like years, like 3 years. So we're basically trying to sponsor everybody in that film. One is already here, and the others we're working on. So.
The girl is amazing. She's stateless, and she's like a natural born feminist. She's incredible. No education, and yet she's just so feisty. Okay, so yeah, well, we're screening that tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock at the Resistance Centre in 472 Hunter Street. Admission is free, or if you've got, $15,000, bring that along. We'll get it to Stephen to do something with. I can't think of anything. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, you guys, for staying up late. And and the signage. Excellent. Thank you,
Thank you.
Dion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, all the best.
Thank you,
Oh, give
everyone.
it a big clap.
Yay.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
She might scratch.
Oh, the cat. What's she called, the cat?
Just hold gently.
Huh?
Just hold gently.
No, not happening.
Okay.
Oh, there is, there is, there is.
The cat is there. There's a cat there, but
What's it called?
what's it?
Mimia.
Hold on, we'll just get the cat on camera and then we'll really say goodbye. Here we
Oh,
go.
you've got to take a picture, Mary. Or do I take a picture or a screenshot?
You take a
Bye.
picture.
Puss, puss.
Bye.
Here, puss.
All right, guys. Bye.
The cat says bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks very much.
Where's Betty?
Oh, she's.
In the cupboard.